take a slow breath. Let the noise of the modern world soften. Imagine the air growing colder, cleaner, untouched by engines or electricity. You are not in a city. There are no roads, no borders, no clocks. You are standing at the edge of a vast, silent land, long before it was called America. The ground beneath your feet is frozen and hard. In the distance, stretched across the horizon, lies the Bering Land Bridge. It is not a bridge in the way you imagine one today. There are no rails, no signs, no clear beginning or end. Just a wide expanse of earth connecting Asia and North America, revealed by falling sea levels during the last ice age. People cross it slowly, not knowing they are stepping onto a new continent. They follow animals, seasons, and instinct. There is no map. There is only survival. Life here moves at the pace of nature. Days are measured by sunlight, not hours. Food is never guaranteed. You hunt when animals appear, gather when the land allows it, and move when the cold becomes unbearable. These early inhabitants do not think of themselves as explorers. They are simply living, adapting, and enduring. Over thousands of years, the ice retreats, forests grow, rivers carve their paths through the land. The people spread outward, following water, fertile soil, and familiar patterns of life. Slowly, distinct cultures emerge, each one shaped by the land it calls home. In the dry deserts of the Southwest, the Pueblo peoples build homes from stone and clay. Their villages rise from the earth itself, blending into the landscape. They farm corn, beans, and squash, carefully managing scarce water through irrigation channels. Life here is planned, communal, and deeply tied to the cycles of the sun and rain. Far to the east, in dense forests near rivers and lakes, the Iroquois form powerful confederations. Their longhouses shelter extended families under one roof. Decisions are made through councils, guided by tradition and balance rather than force. Words carry weight here. Memory is preserved through storytelling and symbolic belts woven from shells. History lives in voices, not books. In the southeastern woodlands, the Cherokee develop a life shaped by agriculture and trade. Their villages are surrounded by fields, their social structures complex and organized. They understand the land not as something to conquer, but as something to respect. Every forest, river, and animal holds meaning beyond its physical form. On the vast plains, the Sioux follow the movement of bison herds. The open land teaches patience and endurance. Everything taken from an animal is used: food, clothing, shelter, tools. Waste is rare. Survival depends on understanding patterns, reading the wind, and knowing when to move and when to stay. Across the continent, life is diverse but connected by common rhythms. Hunting is quiet and deliberate. Agriculture requires cooperation and timing. Children learn by watching, listening, and doing. Elders are valued for their knowledge, not their strength. Time moves in circles, not straight lines. There are no written laws, but rules are understood. No prisons, but consequences. No currency, yet trade networks stretch for hundreds of miles. Obsidian, shells, copper, and stories travel from one community to another, linking distant peoples who may never meet face to face. Spiritual life is woven into daily existence. The natural world is alive, watching, responding. Animals are teachers. Mountains are ancestors. The sky is not empty. Ceremonies mark births, deaths, harvests, and seasons, grounding people in a universe where nothing exists alone. This is America before European contact, a land already full, full of languages, traditions, conflicts, alliances, and quiet moments by firelight. A place shaped not by nations or flags, but by human adaptation over tens of thousands of years. As night settles over this ancient landscape, there is no artificial light to break the darkness. Only stars overhead and the steady sounds of wind, water, and distant movement. Life here is not easy, but it is understood. The land provides, the land takes away, and people learn to live within its limits. There is no rush, no future to chase. Only the present moment, steady and enduring, stretching quietly across generations. Let the air shift again. The land is the same, wide and quiet, but something unfamiliar begins to move along its edges. The sound comes first, long before faces are seen. Wood creaks, fabric snaps in the wind. The slow rhythm of waves carries shapes across the horizon that do not belong to the shore. In 1492, wooden ships cut through the Atlantic, driven by wind, ambition, and uncertainty. Christopher Columbus stands on the deck, scanning the water ahead, convinced he is nearing Asia. He is not searching for a new world. He is searching for a faster route, a shortcut through the unknown. When land finally appears, it is not the place he believes it to be, but that misunderstanding will not slow him down. The arrival is brief and confusing. Languages do not align. Gestures replace words. What one side sees as curiosity, the other senses as caution. The exchange is uneven from the start. Metal tools and bright objects change hands, but so do assumptions. The newcomers do not see established societies. They see opportunity. Spanish expeditions follow quickly. Ships return heavier than they left, not with spices or silk, but with stories of gold, land, and people who can be claimed. Settlements form along the Caribbean and into Central and South America, expanding outward with force. Horses, steel weapons, and unfamiliar tactics reshape conflict. Entire cities fall not only to armies but to exhaustion and fear. Further north, the pattern repeats more slowly. French explorers trace rivers deep into the continent, following water routes that seem endless. They travel lightly, trading rather than conquering, forming alliances with native communities. Furs become currency. Canoes glide silently through forests where no roads exist. The French presence is quieter, but no less permanent. English exploration arrives with hesitation and hope. Ships touch the coast, map shorelines, and leave again. Early attempts at settlement struggle against hunger, weather, and unfamiliar land. The coast appears forgiving from the sea, but inland it resists control. Still, the pull remains strong. The promise of land draws explorers back again and again. What none of them fully understand is what they carry with them unseen. Alongside iron and cloth travel viruses that have lived for centuries among dense populations overseas. Smallpox, measles, influenza. Diseases that seem ordinary to Europeans move silently through native communities with devastating speed. There is no immunity, no warning, no explanation that makes sense within existing knowledge systems. Illness spreads faster than news of the newcomers themselves. Villages empty, elders fall first, taking stories, rituals, and memory with them. Entire communities weaken before a single weapon is raised. The land begins to change without a battle. Fields go untended. Trade routes fall quiet. Social structures strain under the weight of loss. Survivors search for meaning in events that feel sudden and unstoppable. The collapse is uneven, unpredictable, and relentless. European observers often misunderstand what they see. Empty villages are mistaken for abandoned land. Reduced populations are read as weakness rather than tragedy. Expansion accelerates, built on the illusion that space is available, waiting to be claimed. Exploration continues inland. Rivers are named. Coasts are charted. Flags are planted in soil that already holds meaning. The act of naming becomes a form of ownership. Maps grow more detailed, but understanding remains shallow. Between 1492 and 1607, contact spreads in fragments. Some encounters are brief and cautious. Others turn violent. Alliances form and dissolve. Trade creates dependence. Missionaries arrive, carrying beliefs as foreign as the diseases that preceded them. By the early 17th century, the Americas are no longer isolated. The ocean has become a bridge rather than a barrier. Ships arrive with increasing regularity, bringing settlers who intend to stay. The balance shifts slowly but decisively. The land is still vast. Forests remain dense. Rivers still run freely. But the quiet that once defined this place has changed. Something irreversible has begun, not all at once, but step by step, ship by ship. Night falls along the coast. Campfires flicker near newly anchored vessels. Inland, the stars remain unchanged, indifferent to movement below. The world continues, steady and patient, even as its rhythm begins to alter. Nothing feels sudden from within the moment. Change rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, settles in, and reshapes everything it touches. The shoreline comes into view slowly, low and wooded, quiet from a distance. The ships approach with caution, their hulls heavy, their crews thinner than when they left home. The ocean crossing has taken months. Food ran low. Water turned stale. Bodies learned the rhythm of sickness and recovery. When land finally appears, it feels less like a destination and more like relief. In 1607, a small group of English settlers steps onto unfamiliar ground near a wide river they will later call the James. They name their settlement Jamestown. The name carries confidence. The reality does not. The air is humid. Insects linger. The soil looks promising, but farming here follows rules no one aboard the ships fully understands. The settlers are not farmers by training. Many are gentlemen, craftsmen, or laborers chasing opportunity rather than sustenance. They build quickly, driven by urgency more than planning. Wooden walls rise. Fires burn. Hope settles in, fragile and easily disturbed. Food becomes a daily concern. The river provides fish, but disease thrives in its stagnant edges. Fresh water is scarce. Crops struggle in unfamiliar seasons. Hunger sharpens tempers. Leadership shifts. Promises of wealth fade into the quiet necessity of survival. The local native communities watch from a distance. Encounters are tense but cautious. Trade offers brief stability. Corn exchanged for tools. Knowledge passed unevenly. The balance remains delicate. One harsh winter is enough to break it. Jamestown survives not through comfort, but through persistence. Loss becomes routine. Burials mark the landscape. Over time, hard lessons take hold. Farming improves. Tobacco begins to grow, reshaping priorities and labor. Survival slowly turns into endurance. A decade later and further north, another group crosses the Atlantic under very different motivations. In 1620, the Mayflower reaches the cold shores of New England. The passengers are families, bound by faith and shared belief. They name their settlement Plymouth. The land here is rocky. Winters arrive early, and leave late. The cold is sharp, unforgiving. Shelters are basic. Supplies run thin before the first harvest. Illness spreads quietly through cramped quarters. Nearly half do not survive the first year. Those who remain rely on cooperation. Labor is shared. Decisions are collective. Faith provides structure when certainty is absent. The world is interpreted through belief, success, and failure woven into a moral order. Help comes from unexpected directions. Local native peoples teach planting methods suited to the soil. Corn grows where English grains fail. Fishing expands food sources. Survival becomes possible, though never easy. As word spreads across the Atlantic, more arrive. Not all seek land alone. Many are drawn by religion. Puritans leave England not to abandon faith, but to practice it without interference. They settle in tightly organized communities, shaping daily life around discipline, work, and worship. Villages form with purpose. Homes cluster near meeting houses. The calendar follows religious rhythm. Rules are clear. Belonging is conditional. Stability depends on conformity as much as cooperation. Life in these colonies is defined by effort. Every task takes longer. Every resource must be earned. Forests must be cleared by hand. Tools wear quickly. Weather controls outcomes more than intention. Failure is common. Success is modest. Isolation shapes the mind. Letters from home take months if they arrive at all. England feels distant, almost abstract. The colonies develop their own habits, their own expectations. Authority feels closer. Decisions feel heavier. Children grow up knowing work before leisure. Education centers on reading scripture. Skills are passed through observation rather than instruction. Life is repetitive, physical, and quiet. Disease remains an unseen presence. Medical knowledge is limited. Treatments rely on tradition more than understanding. Recovery is uncertain. Death is familiar, acknowledged without ceremony beyond what time allows. Despite hardship, settlements expand. Farms spread outward. Roads appear slowly, worn by repeated passage rather than design. Trade networks grow between colonies, fragile but functional. The struggle for survival does not end. It settles in, becoming the background of daily life. Hunger fades, but never disappears. Comfort remains rare. Stability is temporary. What begins as an experiment becomes something more durable. Communities take root. Generations replace one another. The land absorbs effort and returns just enough to continue. As evenings fall over these early colonies, smoke rises from hearths. The sounds are simple. Wind in trees, tools set aside. Quiet conversations held close to the fire. Survival is not celebrated. It is simply maintained, day after day, in a place that demands patience above all else. The settlements no longer feel temporary. What once clung to the coastline now stretches inward, slow and deliberate. Paths become roads through repetition. Clearings widen into fields. The land begins to carry the marks of routine rather than arrival. By the late 17th century, the English colonies have settled into patterns. Survival is no longer the only concern. Now, there is planning. Planting follows seasons with more confidence. Harvests are expected, even if never guaranteed. Agriculture becomes the backbone of daily life, shaping where people live and how they spend their days. In the southern colonies, the soil is rich and the growing season long. Large plantations spread across the countryside. Tobacco dominates first, followed by rice and indigo. These crops require constant labor, more than small families can provide. The solution is assumed rather than questioned. Enslaved Africans are brought across the Atlantic in increasing numbers, forced into a system that ties human lives directly to profit. The work is relentless. Fields stretch far beyond sight. The heat presses down. Time is measured in tasks completed rather than hours passed. For those enslaved, there is no ownership of labor, body, or future. The system hardens quietly, becoming normalized through repetition and distance from its consequences. In the northern colonies, the land offers less room for vast plantations. Farms are smaller, closer together. Families work their own fields, growing food for subsistence rather than export. Crops vary. Livestock matters. Survival still requires effort, but the rhythm is different. Trade begins to define these regions more clearly. Northern ports grow busy. Ships come and go, carrying lumber, fish, and rum. Towns develop around harbors. Warehouses rise. Merchants track cargo and weather with equal attention. Money flows unevenly, but it flows. Crafts and small industries take hold. Blacksmiths, shipbuilders, and coopers become essential. Labor divides into specialties. Life becomes less centered on a single task and more on exchange. Goods move outward. Ideas move with them. Between North and South, differences deepen, not just in economy, but in daily experience. One region revolves around large estates and forced labor. The other leans toward towns, trade, and family farms. These distinctions are not yet conflicts. They exist quietly, shaping habits and expectations without demanding resolution. Across all colonies, ties to England remain strong. The Atlantic is no longer an obstacle. It is a corridor. Ships carry finished goods from Britain and return with raw materials. The colonies produce. England profits. The system feels orderly from a distance. Laws are written to protect this balance. Trade is regulated. Certain goods must pass through English ports. Colonial economies grow within defined limits. For many settlers, this feels normal. England provides protection, markets, and identity. Loyalty is assumed, rarely examined. Cultural connections persist. Fashion follows London. News arrives late, but still matters. Education reflects English traditions. The colonies see themselves as extensions rather than replacements. At the same time, daily governance becomes local. Assemblies meet. Taxes are discussed. Decisions are made closer to home. Authority feels immediate. Problems are solved by neighbors rather than distant officials. Independence of thought grows without naming itself. Slavery expands alongside prosperity. Ships arrive carrying human cargo. The system spreads beyond plantations into ports and households. The contradiction remains largely unspoken. Economic growth dulls moral discomfort. Distance shields responsibility. Native lands continue to shrink as settlements expand. Agreements are made, broken, remade. Boundaries shift. Pressure builds quietly at the edges. Expansion feels inevitable to those inside it. Population increases steadily. Families grow. New arrivals fill towns and farms. The colonies become crowded by earlier standards. Resources are worked harder. Expectations rise. By the mid-18th century, the 13 colonies form a continuous presence along the Atlantic coast. They are connected by trade, custom, and habit. Differences exist, but so does familiarity. The idea of permanence settles in. Evenings bring routine comforts. Lamps are lit. Ledgers are closed. Fields rest until morning. The colonies hum softly with activity, balanced between dependence and self-direction. Nothing feels unstable. Growth appears steady. Order feels natural. The systems in place seem durable, reinforced by daily repetition. The future appears to stretch forward without disruption, shaped by work, trade, and quiet loyalty carried across the ocean. The land beyond the settled coast feels different. Forests thicken. Rivers stretch farther inland, winding through territory that is claimed on maps, but not controlled on the ground. Here, boundaries are uncertain. Power is measured not by distance from the crown, but by who can move, trade, and survive in the interior. By the middle of the 18th century, two European empires press toward the same space. Britain approaches from the east, its colonies expanding steadily westward. France moves south and east from Canada, following rivers deep into the continent. Both see opportunity. Neither sees room for the other. The conflict does not begin with declarations or ceremonies. It begins quietly, with patrols, outposts, and small encounters in contested land. Forts rise near rivers and crossroads. Flags are raised. Alliances are tested. The forest absorbs the sound of distant gunfire and keeps its silence. Native nations stand at the center of the struggle, not as spectators, but as participants navigating survival between empires. Alliances are chosen carefully, often shifting as conditions change. Promises are weighed against history. The land remembers past betrayals even when newcomers do not. In 1754, fighting breaks into the open. British colonial forces clash with French troops near the Ohio River Valley. The encounters are small but decisive in their meaning. What was once tension becomes war. This conflict will later be called the French and Indian War, named not for its geography, but for its perspective. To the British colonists, the enemy appears foreign and distant. To those fighting on the ground, it is immediate, shaped by terrain and endurance rather than ideology. The war spreads across continents. In Europe, it merges into a larger global struggle. On North American soil, it remains close and personal. Battles are fought in forests rather than fields. Supply lines stretch thin. Weather matters as much as strategy. British forces arrive with expectations shaped by European warfare. They march in formation, bright uniforms cutting through green wilderness. French troops and their native allies move differently. They adapt to the land, using cover, speed, and familiarity. Early British losses reflect this mismatch. Over time, Britain adjusts. Resources pour in. Troops arrive in greater numbers. Roads are cut through forests. Forts fall one by one. The scale of the war grows heavier, more demanding. Colonial militias are drawn into the effort. Farmers leave fields. Merchants pause trade. The war becomes part of daily life, felt through shortages and uncertainty. Victory feels distant. Loss becomes familiar. When the fighting finally slows, the outcome is clear. France cedes much of its North American territory. Britain emerges dominant across the continent. Maps are redrawn. Empires recalibrate. But victory carries weight. War is expensive. Ships, soldiers, weapons, and logistics drain the British treasury. The cost lingers long after the final battles fade into memory. Debt settles in quietly, pressing for resolution. From across the Atlantic, solutions appear simple. The colonies benefited from protection. They should contribute to the cost. Taxes are not framed as punishment, but as responsibility. The logic feels sound to those far removed from colonial life. New policies take shape. Duties are proposed. Revenue is expected. The colonies are no longer viewed solely as partners in growth, but as sources of financial support. For colonists, the shift feels subtle at first. Trade continues. Farms operate. Daily routines hold. But the presence of authority feels closer. Officials arrive. Rules become clearer. Enforcement grows firmer. The wars change more than borders. It has altered relationships. Britain's role expands from distant overseer to active manager. The colonies are no longer just growing communities. They are assets to be accounted for. The forest quiets again. Forts stand where temporary camps once existed. Roads cut permanent lines through land that was once unbroken. Movement becomes easier. Control becomes more tangible. Yet beneath the surface, something unsettles. Expectations have shifted on both sides of the ocean. Assumptions about loyalty, obligation, and authority no longer align as smoothly as before. Evenings return to routine. Lamps glow. Ledgers are updated. Life resumes its steady rhythm. The war fades into memory, spoken of as a necessary struggle, a costly success. But the cost remains. It sits in balance sheets, in policies drafted far away, in new demands that arrive quietly, wrapped in official language. Nothing feels urgent yet. Nothing breaks. The systems still function. But the landscape has changed, not just in territory, but in tone. The war is over. Its consequences continue, settling into place as calmly and persistently as the land itself. The war has ended, but its presence lingers. Soldiers return home. Trade routes reopen. Life resumes its familiar rhythm along farms, ports, and towns. On the surface, nothing appears broken. Yet beneath the routine, something has shifted, subtle but persistent, like pressure building where no release exists. Britain now looks at the colonies differently. The land is secure. Rival empires have been pushed aside. Control feels closer, more direct. From across the Atlantic, governance becomes a matter of order and balance. Rules are clarified. Systems are tightened. What once felt distant begins to arrive in official language and stamped paper. In 1765, the Stamp Act quietly enters colonial life. It does not arrive with soldiers or cannons. It comes in documents, newspapers, legal papers, licenses, contracts. Everyday items now require an official stamp, proof of payment to the crown. The change feels administrative, almost dull, but its reach is wide. For the first time, taxation touches daily communication. Reading the news, signing agreements, conducting business, all now carry a cost imposed from far away. The amount is not always severe. What unsettles is the principle. Decisions affecting daily life are being made without local input. Discontent spreads slowly. Conversations shift in taverns and meeting halls. Printers grow cautious. Merchants calculate margins more carefully. Resistance begins not as rebellion, but as unease. Something feels misaligned. The phrase emerges quietly, repeated often enough to take hold. Taxation without representation. It is not shouted at first. It is discussed, weighed, tested in conversation. The idea gains strength through repetition rather than force. It frames discomfort into language. Britain responds with confidence rather than concern. Parliament holds authority. The empire requires coordination. Order must be maintained. From this distance, colonial frustration seems manageable, even expected. Adjustments are made, but control remains the priority. Protests take shape. Some are formal, written in petitions and resolutions. Others are symbolic, designed to be seen rather than negotiated. Boycotts begin. goods remain unsold. Imports sit idle at docks. Participation varies, but the message travels. The Stamp Act is eventually repealed. Relief follows briefly. Celebrations mark the moment. But the underlying issue remains unresolved. Authority has been asserted, then softened without clarity. The pattern repeats. New measures follow. Duties on goods. Increased enforcement. A growing presence of officials tasked with ensuring compliance. Each policy arrives with justification. Each is met with renewed resistance. The cycle becomes familiar. Tension concentrates in port cities, where trade and regulation collide most directly. Boston, crowded and active, absorbs pressure from all sides. Ships arrive with goods that now symbolize control as much as commerce. In 1773, a shipment of tea becomes the focus. Tea is common, woven into daily habit. It is also taxed. The cargo sits in the harbor, legally imported, politically charged. Meetings are held. Voices rise. Options narrow. One night, figures move quietly along the docks. Disguises are worn, not for secrecy alone, but for symbolism. Crates are opened. Tea spills into the dark water. The harbor absorbs it without protest. The act is deliberate, controlled, and unmistakable. The Boston Tea Party is not loud rebellion. It is precise defiance. No property beyond the tea is damaged. No people are harmed. The message is clear without being spoken. Britain's response is swift and firm. Laws tighten. The port is closed. Authority presses down rather than stepping back. What was once a dispute over policy becomes a test of power. Daily life grows heavier. Commerce slows. Occupation feels closer. Troops are present, visible reminders of distant decisions. The space between ruler and ruled feels narrower. Colonial assemblies meet more often. Cooperation increases between regions that once saw little reason to coordinate. Shared concern creates shared purpose, even if the destination remains unclear. The idea of independence is not yet settled. Many still consider themselves British subjects. Loyalty has not vanished. It is strained, stretched thin by repeated friction. Time passes. Measures accumulate. Trust erodes quietly. What was once tolerated becomes questioned. What was once assumed becomes debated. The road forward is not marked. It unfolds through small choices, repeated responses, and shifting expectations. Each action invites a reaction. Each policy leaves residue. Evenings continue as they always have. Candles are lit. Meals are shared. Ships come and go where allowed. Life does not pause for political tension. It absorbs it. The conflict remains unresolved, suspended between habit and change. Nothing has broken yet. But the balance that once held everything steady no longer feels secure. The path ahead forms not through declaration, but through accumulation. Pressure gathers. Words harden into belief. The distance between obedience and resistance narrows. Quietly, day by day, the tension that once lingered in conversations now moves into the open air. It no longer rests in documents or dockyards alone. It gathers in fields, along roads, and at the edges of towns. The presence of soldiers is no longer symbolic. It is physical, audible, and unavoidable. In the spring of 1775, conflict begins without ceremony. Shots are fired in small towns outside Boston. The encounters are brief, confused, and decisive in their meaning. What had been resistance becomes war. The shift is not announced. It is recognized. Militias form quickly, drawn from farmers, laborers, and tradesmen. They carry familiar tools repurposed as weapons. Training is uneven. Supplies are limited. Commitment varies, yet movement continues. People gather not because they are prepared, but because circumstances allow no pause. Britain responds with the force of an established empire. Professional soldiers arrive in formation. Discipline contrasts sharply with colonial improvisation. The difference is visible immediately. Uniforms are clean. Commands are precise. Experience weighs heavily on every engagement. Leadership becomes essential. A figure emerges not through spectacle, but through steadiness. George Washington takes command of the Continental Army. He does not arrive with certainty or advantage. He arrives with restraint, aware of limitations, attentive to morale. Washington understands that victory will not come through decisive battles alone. The colonies lack resources, training, and unity. Survival itself becomes a strategy. Engagements are chosen carefully. Retreat is accepted when necessary. Preservation of the army matters more than territory. The war moves unpredictably. Control shifts from place to place. Cities are taken, then abandoned. Armies endure winters that test resolve more than strength. Cold settles into camps. Food runs low. Clothing wears thin. Disease claims more lives than combat. The population feels the weight unevenly. Some towns support the cause openly. Others remain divided. Loyalty fractures families and communities. The war is not distant. It passes through doorways and fields, leaving disruption behind. British forces hold advantages in numbers and equipment. Naval power dominates the coast. Supply lines stretch across the ocean but remain functional. From a distance, the outcome appears certain. Yet time alters perception. The longer the conflict continues, the heavier it becomes for Britain to maintain. Distance complicates command. Communication slows. The cost grows steadily. The colonies endure by necessity. They adapt rather than advance. Small victories matter more than grand gestures. Confidence builds slowly, often followed by setbacks. Progress is measured in survival. Across the Atlantic, attention shifts. France watches closely. Old rivalries linger. The opportunity to weaken Britain does not go unnoticed. Support begins quietly, then openly. Supplies arrive. Advisors assist. The balance begins to adjust. French involvement does not arrive as rescue. It arrives as reinforcement. The war remains uncertain. Coordination takes time. Trust is built cautiously. Still, the presence of a powerful ally alters calculations. Naval engagement becomes crucial. French ships challenge British control of the sea. Movement becomes restricted. Momentum shifts in ways that maps struggle to capture. As years pass, exhaustion spreads. The war touches every aspect of life. Trade falters. Farms struggle. Inflation rises. Patience wears thin. Yet withdrawal feels impossible. Too much has already been invested. Key moments emerge without announcing themselves as such. A surrender here, a retreat there. Each changes perception slightly. Confidence moves incrementally. By 1781, circumstances align in a way that feels almost accidental. British forces find themselves cornered at Yorktown. Land and sea converge. Escape narrows. Options diminish. The siege unfolds steadily, without drama. When surrender comes, it is formal and restrained. The war does not end immediately. Negotiations follow. Time passes. But the direction is clear. In 1783, recognition arrives. Britain acknowledges the independence of the former colonies. The decision is recorded, signed, and archived. The fighting stops. What remains is quieter. Armies disperse. Soldiers return to fields and trades. The land absorbs the traces of conflict slowly. Buildings are repaired. Roads resume familiar use. The war does not leave behind clarity. It leaves questions. Authority has shifted. Identity remains unsettled. Victory does not resolve complexity. It introduces new responsibility. Evenings return to routine. Lamps are lit. Conversations soften. The noise of marching fades. The world feels altered, but not transformed overnight. Independence exists now as fact, rather than intention. It rests uneasily, waiting to be defined. The conflict has ended. Its meaning continues to settle, quietly, into the shape of daily life. The war continues, but something else begins to take shape alongside it. Not on the battlefield, but at desks, in meeting rooms, and through carefully chosen words. Amid uncertainty and conflict, the colonies begin to define what they believe they are becoming. In the summer of 1776, representatives gather in Philadelphia. The air is heavy with heat and expectation. Windows are kept shut to preserve privacy. Voices remain low, deliberate. What is discussed here is not only strategy, but identity. The question is no longer how to protest authority, but how to explain separation. Thomas Jefferson takes on the task of writing. He works in relative quiet, shaping language meant to do more than persuade. The document must justify rupture, not just announce it. It must speak beyond the moment, beyond the war, to principles that can endure. The words form slowly. They draw from familiar ideas: natural rights, consent of the governed, equality before the law. These concepts are not new, but placing them together gives them weight. The tone is measured, formal, restrained. Emotion is present, but controlled. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is adopted. The act itself is brief. The consequences are not. Copies are printed. They travel outward, carried by riders and ships, read aloud in towns and public squares. The announcement spreads unevenly, absorbed at different speeds. The Declaration does not end the war. Fighting continues. Lives are still lost. Hardship remains. Yet something has shifted. The conflict now carries a defined purpose. The colonies no longer claim to defend their rights within the empire. They claim to exist outside it. For many, the words feel distant from daily reality. Fields still need tending. Supplies are scarce. Uncertainty persists. The Declaration offers no immediate comfort. It offers direction. The idea of a nation begins as abstraction. There are no established institutions strong enough to support it fully. Authority is fragmented. Power rests unevenly between states and central bodies. Cooperation is necessary, but difficult. After the war's end, attention turns inward. Independence has been recognized, but governance remains unresolved. The Articles of Confederation attempt to hold the states together loosely. They favor autonomy over unity. Decisions require consensus. Action moves slowly. Problems emerge. Debt remains from the war. Trade disputes arise between states. Currency varies. Enforcement is weak. The structure designed to preserve freedom struggles to provide stability. Meetings resume. Delegates gather again, this time to revise rather than declare. The atmosphere is cautious. Power must be balanced carefully. Too much central authority risks replacing one distant ruler with another. Too little invites disorder. The Constitutional Convention convenes in 1787. Debates stretch long into the day. Compromises are negotiated, sometimes reluctantly. Representation, federal power, individual rights. Each issue demands attention. The resulting document reflects restraint. Power is divided deliberately. Checks are built in. No single branch is trusted completely. The language remains formal, deliberate, patient. Ratification takes time. States consider carefully. Arguments circulate through newspapers and meetings. Support is not unanimous. Doubt persists. Acceptance arrives gradually. By 1789, a new framework is in place. The United States exists not just as an idea, but as a functioning system. Institutions begin their work. Elections are held. Offices are filled. The birth of the nation is not marked by celebration alone. It is accompanied by responsibility. Independence requires maintenance. Principles require application. The work feels ongoing. Life continues much of before in many places. Farms operate. Trade resumes. Roads carry familiar traffic. Change is subtle, woven into structure rather than spectacle. The Declaration remains not as a daily presence, but as a reference point. Its words sit quietly in the background, shaping expectations without constant attention. The nation begins not with certainty, but with intention. It grows not through sudden transformation, but through repetition, adjustment, and time. Evenings return to their routines. Candles burn low. Conversations settle. The noise of war fades further into memory. The future remains open, undefined, waiting to be filled by ordinary days, lived under a newly named identity. The war is over. Independence has been recognized. Yet peace brings its own uncertainty. Without an external enemy to define purpose, attention turns inward. The question is no longer how to separate, but how to hold together. In 1789, the Constitution comes into effect. It is not announced with spectacle. It arrives quietly, as documents often do, through ratification, acceptance, and gradual implementation. Its presence is felt not through force, but through structure. The Constitution outlines a federal government designed to function without relying on trust alone. Power is divided carefully. Authority is split between branches, each intended to limit the others. The arrangement reflects caution rather than confidence. Experience has taught restraint. The executive branch takes shape first. George Washington is chosen unanimously to serve as president. His selection is practical rather than dramatic. He represents continuity, familiarity, and credibility. The office itself is untested. Expectations are undefined. Washington approaches the role with care. He understands that his actions will set patterns that others will follow. There is no precedent to lean on. Every decision carries symbolic weight. Even small gestures become signals. The federal government begins modestly. Offices are few. Resources are limited. Communication moves slowly. Policies are formed through deliberation rather than momentum. The pace feels deliberate, sometimes hesitant. Cabinet positions are created to manage specialized responsibilities. Advisors debate openly. Disagreement is present from the beginning. Different visions for the nation coexist uneasily, expressed through policy rather than rhetoric. The economy demands attention. Debt from the war remains unresolved. Financial systems are fragile. Decisions about taxation, banking, and trade shape daily life more than speeches ever could. Stability becomes a priority. Foreign relations require balance. The world beyond the Atlantic remains unsettled. Empires watch carefully. The young nation seeks recognition without entanglement. Neutrality becomes a guiding principle, not as ideology, but as necessity. Washington resists the appearance of monarchy. Titles are avoided. Formality is controlled. Power is exercised, but visibly restrained. Authority must feel legitimate rather than inherited. The Bill of Rights is adopted to address lingering concerns. Individual liberties are clarified, not expanded through force, but codified through agreement. These amendments serve as reassurance, anchoring freedom within structure. As Washington's presidency continues, routines form. Elections occur without upheaval. Transitions feel orderly. Confidence grows quietly. In 1797, Washington steps aside voluntarily. The act carries weight. Leadership changes without violence or coercion. The system holds. John Adams assumes the presidency. The transfer is calm, almost understated. Governance continues. Challenges persist. The framework remains intact. The federal government settles into daily function. Laws are passed. Courts operate. Revenue is collected. Disputes arise and are managed through process rather than confrontation. The nation remains fragile but functional. Its foundations rest not on charisma or conquest, but on procedures designed to endure ordinary pressures. Life outside government changes slowly. Communities adjust. Expectations evolve. Authority feels present, but not overwhelming. By 1800, the United States has not resolved all uncertainty. It has established mechanisms to address it. Stability exists not as permanence, but as habit. The Constitution remains central, not as a constant focus, but as a silent framework supporting routine. Its success lies in its invisibility during calm moments. Evenings settle as they always have. Lamps are lit. Papers are set aside. The machinery of government continues its steady movement, shaping a nation through quiet consistency rather than sudden transformation. The eastern towns continue their routines, but the horizon no longer feels fixed. Beyond the settled edges, the land stretches outward, wide and undefined, inviting movement simply by existing. Roads point west. Rivers flow in that direction. Attention follows. In 1803, a decision made far from the frontier reshapes everything quietly. The Louisiana Purchase transfers an immense expanse of land from France to the United States. The transaction is legal, diplomatic, and distant from the people it will affect most. Ink dries on paper. Ownership changes hands. The nation's size doubles almost overnight. For those living along the coast, the change feels abstract. Maps are redrawn. Conversations shift. Possibility expands without immediate demand. For those already moving west, the purchase gives shape to intention. Land that once felt uncertain now feels accessible. Exploration accelerates. Expeditions trace rivers and mountain passes. Journals fill with observations rather than certainty. The terrain resists simplification. Plains extend farther than expected. Mountains rise suddenly, indifferent to plans. Travel remains slow, demanding patience and endurance. Settlers follow gradually. Families pack belongings into wagons, carrying tools, furniture, and expectation. The journey is long and uneven. Weather dictates pace. Illness delays progress. Breakdowns are common. Stopping is often not a choice, but a necessity. The idea begins to circulate, not as law, but as belief. Manifest destiny. The sense that expansion is not only possible, but justified. That movement westward reflects purpose rather than ambition. The phrase settles into conversation, shaping perception without formal declaration. Land is surveyed and divided. Boundaries are measured. Claims are recorded. Ownership becomes something that can be filed and enforced. The process feels orderly on paper, less so on the ground. For native peoples, the shift is neither abstract nor gradual. Pressure builds along established homelands. Treaties are negotiated, revised, and broken. Promises are made with conditions attached. Resistance meets force. Accommodation brings loss. Removal becomes policy. Communities are told to relocate, often with little warning or choice. The journeys are harsh, supplies are limited, paths are unfamiliar. The movement is framed as necessity, but experienced as rupture. The land absorbs these movements silently. Fields are cleared where forests once stood. Trails deepen into roads. Towns appear, then stabilize. What was once frontier becomes settlement through repetition. Agriculture follows. Crops adapt slowly. Markets form. Trade routes shift. The economy stretches westward alongside population. Resources are extracted. Livelihoods are built incrementally. Conflict remains close. Borders between states and territories shift. Authority struggles to keep pace with movement. Governance lags behind settlement, leaving gaps filled by improvisation. Despite hardship, momentum continues. Each success encourages another attempt. Each failure becomes instruction rather than deterrent. The westward pull strengthens through familiarity. Native removal continues as settlement expands. The human cost remains present, though often unseen by those who benefit from the land's availability. The distance between cause and consequence grows wider. By the 1840s, the nation's shape has changed visibly. What once felt distant now feels connected. Rivers link regions. Trails tie communities together. Expansion becomes expectation rather than experiment. The land does not promise ease. It demands labor, endurance, and adjustment. Yet it offers space, and space holds meaning. Evenings along the frontier mirror those in the east. Fires burn. Meals are shared. Silence settles in once movement stops. The work of building continues the next day. Westward expansion unfolds without single direction or uniform experience. It is shaped by decisions made far away and actions taken up close. It advances through belief, policy, and persistence. The nation stretches outward, not all at once, but step by step. The land changes hands. Lives are displaced. New routines take hold. Movement becomes habit. Habit becomes structure. The frontier moves again, always just beyond reach, waiting to be defined by those willing to follow it. The nation continues to expand across the continent, but its forward motion no longer feels unified. Beneath the surface of growth and opportunity, tension settles into daily life, quiet but constant. What once appeared as regional difference gradually hardens into something deeper, carried not only by geography, but by belief. By the early 19th century, the North and South are living within the same political structure while moving in different directions. In the North, towns swell into cities, factories multiply, labor shifts toward wages, schedules, and contracts. Time is measured by clocks and output. Life becomes faster, more segmented, and increasingly urban. In the South, the rhythm remains agricultural. Vast plantations dominate the landscape. Cotton becomes central, binding land, labor, and profit together. Enslaved people form the foundation of this system, their forced labor sustaining wealth and social order. Daily life moves according to seasons rather than machines, but it rests on permanence enforced through control. These two worlds coexist uneasily. Trade links them. Laws bind them. Yet experience separates them. Each region begins to see the other less as a partner and more as a problem to be managed. As new territories are added through westward expansion, the question follows closely behind. Will slavery move with settlement or remain contained? Each new state is debated carefully, weighed for balance. Votes are counted not just for policy, but for power. Compromises emerge as temporary solutions. Lines are drawn, exceptions are carved out, agreements are signed. Each measure delays conflict but deepens mistrust. The pattern becomes familiar. Calm follows briefly, then tension returns. Public discussion grows louder. Newspapers argue. Speeches are printed and shared. Churches address morality from pulpits. The issue of slavery moves from whispered concern into open disagreement. Silence becomes harder to maintain. Abolitionist movements gather momentum slowly. They do not begin as a unified force. Some voices are measured, others uncompromising. Some appeal to conscience, others to law or economy. Their reach expands unevenly, strongest where slavery feels distant, weakest where it is most entrenched. Opposition is fierce. Abolitionists face threats, censorship, and violence. Meetings are disrupted. Publications are banned. The effort demands persistence rather than speed. Progress is measured in awareness rather than immediate change. In the South, defense of slavery becomes inseparable from identity. It is framed as necessity, tradition, and right. Criticism is perceived as attack. Fear grows that losing control over labor means losing control over society itself. The federal government attempts to hold the center. Laws are passed to enforce compromise. Some restrict speech. Others strengthen enforcement. Each solution prioritizes stability, even as it reveals fragility. Within this environment, Abraham Lincoln rises into prominence. His path is steady rather than sudden. He gains attention through debates and speeches that emphasize unity alongside principle. His language is careful, deliberate, and restrained. Lincoln does not call immediately for radical change. Instead, he questions expansion. He argues that slavery's spread threatens the nation's coherence. His focus remains on preservation as much as morality. His words find an audience. They also provoke resistance. Elections become referendums on the nation's future. Political parties fracture along sectional lines. Voting patterns reflect geography more than ideology. Daily life continues under the weight of debate. Work proceeds. Families gather. Markets open and close. Yet, conversation never drifts far from the unresolved question. The presence of slavery presses into ordinary moments. Trust between regions weakens. Each side anticipates not only disagreement, but loss. The idea of separation enters conversation tentatively, then more openly. What once felt unthinkable begins to feel possible. By the late 1850s, compromise no longer reassures. Each attempt feels temporary, insufficient. The language of debate hardens, positions solidify, flexibility fades. The nation stands divided, not by drawn borders, but by beliefs that feel incompatible. The tension is no longer abstract. It settles into law, politics, and identity. Evenings grow quieter, reflective. Candles burn low as papers are folded away. The future feels uncertain, not because change is unexpected, but because resolution feels unreachable. The divide deepens gradually, shaped by choices made and avoided. The nation moves forward without agreement, carrying unresolved conflict beneath its surface, inching closer to a moment that has been forming quietly for decades. The break does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds through decisions made carefully, formally, and with visible restraint. States declare separation through documents and speeches rather than gunfire. The language is legal. The tone is measured. Yet beneath the formality, the distance between the North and South becomes absolute. By 1861, the nation exists as two opposing visions. In the North, the Union frames itself as preservation. The goal is continuity, the maintenance of a single political body. In the South, the Confederacy forms around autonomy, built on a social and economic system it believes cannot survive within the existing structure. Armies assemble with urgency rather than readiness. Volunteers arrive with expectation and uncertainty. Uniforms vary. Equipment is inconsistent. Confidence often exceeds preparation. Both sides believe the conflict will be brief. The war begins with ceremony stripped away. The first shots are fired, and the meaning is immediate. What follows is not a single campaign, but a sustained test of endurance. Movement replaces debate. Force replaces compromise. Battles unfold across fields, forests, rivers, and towns. Geography shapes outcomes more than ideology. Railroads carry troops and supplies. Rivers become strategic lines. Cities grow quiet as men depart. The Union holds advantages in industry, population, and infrastructure. Factories produce weapons steadily. Supply lines stretch reliably. The Confederacy relies more heavily on agricultural output and determination, compensating for limited resources with resolve. Leadership matters, but control remains elusive. Victories shift momentum without ending uncertainty. Losses accumulate steadily. Each engagement leaves behind silence rather than resolution. Camps become temporary cities. Life there is defined by routine and waiting. Illness spreads easily. Medical knowledge remains limited. Injury often proves more dangerous than combat. Survival becomes unpredictable. Civilians absorb the war unevenly. Some towns feel distant from fighting. Others are consumed by it. Fields are trampled. Homes are occupied or abandoned. The distinction between battlefield and daily life fades. As the war continues, its purpose evolves. What began as a struggle over union becomes inseparable from slavery. The institution that divided the nation moves to the center of the conflict. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation is issued. Its language is careful, its scope defined by military necessity. It does not free all enslaved people immediately, but it alters the meaning of the war. Freedom becomes not only moral argument, but strategic direction. For enslaved individuals, the shift carries hope mixed with uncertainty. Movement toward Union lines increases. Labor patterns shift. Lives remain precarious, but the future opens slightly. The fighting intensifies. Losses mount. The scale becomes difficult to comprehend. Entire communities mourn simultaneously. The number of dead rises steadily, eventually surpassing 600,000. The figure remains abstract until felt personally, through absence rather than statistics. As years pass, exhaustion spreads. Resources thin. Morale fluctuates. The war presses inward, reshaping expectations. Victory becomes less about triumph and more about conclusion. The Confederacy weakens under sustained pressure. Supply shortages grow severe. Transportation falters. Control erodes gradually rather than collapsing at once. In the spring of 1865, the end arrives quietly. A surrender is formalized. There is no final spectacle. The fighting stops. Slavery is abolished through constitutional amendment. The change is legal and permanent. Its implications are vast and unresolved. Freedom arrives not as completion, but as beginning. The nation emerges altered. The Union is preserved, but at immense cost. Landscapes bear scars. Populations are diminished. The social order is unsettled. Soldiers return home unevenly. Some find familiarity. Others find only absence. Reconstruction has not yet begun in earnest, but its necessity is already clear. Evenings after the war feel different. Silence carries weight. Routine resumes slowly. The scale of loss resists comprehension. The Civil War ends without clarity. It resolves a question while opening many others. The nation remains intact, but changed permanently, shaped by endurance, loss, and the long work left ahead. The war has ended, but its presence remains everywhere. It lingers in damaged towns, altered fields, and quiet homes, where absence has become familiar. The sound of marching has faded, yet the nation does not return easily to balance. Peace arrives without clarity, leaving space filled by uncertainty rather than relief. Slavery has ended in law. The institution that shaped generations is abolished through constitutional amendment. The change is final on paper, but uneven in reality. Freedom arrives without instruction. Millions of formerly enslaved people face a future that exists in principle, but lacks structure. Daily life must be rebuilt. Families search for one another, tracing paths broken by years of forced separation. Work is renegotiated. Wages are discussed where ownership once existed. Movement becomes possible, though often restricted by circumstance rather than law. In the South, the landscape is altered physically and socially. Plantations struggle to function without enslaved labor. Fields remain, but systems have collapsed. Wealth is reduced. Infrastructure is damaged. The familiar order no longer holds. The federal government steps in cautiously. Reconstruction begins as an attempt to restore states to the Union while redefining citizenship. The process is deliberate, legalistic, and contested at every stage. Authority moves southward through legislation rather than force, though the presence of troops remains visible. Southern states are required to meet conditions before reintegration. New constitutions are written. Amendments are ratified. Rights are extended formally to formerly enslaved men, including citizenship and suffrage. The language is clear. The application is fragile. For a brief period, possibility expands. Black Americans participate in civic life openly. Schools are established. Churches grow as centers of organization and education. Communities form institutions designed to support autonomy and stability. Political participation increases. Black representatives are elected to local and national offices. Their presence challenges long-held assumptions about power and belonging. The change feels sudden to some, overdue to others. Resistance follows quickly. Former Confederate leaders seek to regain control through legal and extra-legal means. Laws are passed to restrict movement, labor, and behavior. Violence becomes a tool of intimidation. Fear settles in quietly, shaping daily decisions. The federal government responds unevenly. Enforcement fluctuates. Commitment varies with political pressure. Reconstruction becomes a negotiation rather than a guarantee. Economic dependence replaces ownership. Sharecropping spreads across the South, binding laborers to land through debt rather than chains. The system offers survival, but little advancement. Poverty becomes persistent, normalized through routine. Northern attention drifts. Fatigue sets in. The urgency that followed the war fades into routine governance. Reconstruction loses priority as other concerns rise. The presence of federal authority diminishes gradually. Southern states are reintegrated formally. Representation returns. The Union is restored in structure, if not in harmony. Local control increases. As oversight weakens, racial boundaries harden. Segregation emerges not immediately as policy, but as practice. Public spaces divide quietly. Customs form expectations. Separation becomes normalized through repetition rather than declaration. Legal systems adjust to accommodate exclusion. Rights remain written but unenforced. The distance between law and life widens. Discrimination embeds itself into daily routine. By 1877, Reconstruction concludes without ceremony. Federal troops withdraw. Responsibility shifts back to local authorities. The process ends not with resolution, but with compromise. Freedom remains, but equality retreats. The foundations of racial segregation settle into place, shaping society through custom, law, and silence. The changes feel gradual from within, though their impact will last generations. The nation moves forward unevenly. The Union holds, but reconciliation remains incomplete. Reconstruction closes without finality, leaving behind progress achieved and promises deferred. Evenings grow quieter again. Work resumes. Systems stabilize into new forms. The war feels distant, yet its consequences remain present, woven into the structure of everyday life. The era ends without clarity. What follows is not peace fully realized, but continuity reshaped, freedom established, equality postponed, and division preserved beneath the surface of restoration. The nation settles into motion again, but the movement now sounds different. It is louder, faster, more mechanical. Where fields once set the rhythm of life, machines begin to take over. Time is no longer shaped only by daylight and season. It is measured in shifts, schedules, and output. After 1877, industrialization spread steadily across the country. Railroads stretch outward like veins of steel, connecting distant regions with regularity and purpose. Tracks cut through plains, mountains, and towns, binding the continent together through movement. Travel accelerates. Distance shrinks. What once took weeks now takes days. Railroads do more than move people. They move goods, raw materials, and ideas. Coal, steel, timber, and grain flow toward growing cities. Finished products move back out again. Entire industries rise alongside the tracks. Towns appear where lines intersect. Others fade when routes bypass them. Factories grow in size and number. Buildings rise close together, dense with machinery and labor. Inside, the air is thick with heat, noise, and repetition. Work is divided into small tasks, performed over and over. Skill gives way to efficiency. Speed becomes priority. The workforce expands rapidly. Men, women, and children labor long hours. Safety measures are limited. Injuries are common. Wages are low but steady. Employment offers survival rather than comfort. Cities swell under the pressure of growth. Streets fill. Housing becomes crowded. Neighborhoods form quickly, often without planning. Sanitation struggles to keep pace. Clean water is unevenly available. Disease spreads easily. At the same time, opportunity pulls people from across the Atlantic. Immigration from Europe increases sharply. Ships arrive filled with families carrying little more than belongings and expectation. Languages mix along docks and streets. Accents shape neighborhoods. Immigrants arrive from Italy, Ireland, Germany, Eastern Europe, and beyond. Many flee poverty, persecution, or instability. Others seek wages unavailable at home. The journey is long and uncertain. Arrival does not guarantee success. Processing centers handle the influx methodically. Names are recorded. Health is assessed quickly. Decisions are made in moments that shape futures. Some are admitted. Others are turned away. Those who stay settle where work is available. Factories absorb labor readily. Railroads extend crews. Construction demands hands. The work is difficult, but it offers income and possibility. Cultural enclaves form naturally. People cluster by language, custom, and memory. Churches, shops, and social organizations appear, providing familiarity amid unfamiliar surroundings. Traditions persist, adapted to new conditions. Tension accompanies growth. Competition for jobs intensifies. Wages fluctuate. Labor unrest emerges. Strikes form as workers demand shorter hours, safer conditions, and fair pay. Organization grows slowly, often met with resistance. Industrial leaders accumulate wealth rapidly. Large corporations consolidate control. Ownership becomes distant from labor. The gap between rich and poor widens visibly. Wealth concentrates in cities, displayed through buildings, lifestyles, and influence. Government response remains limited. Regulation is minimal. Markets are trusted to correct themselves. Intervention arrives slowly, often after unrest becomes unavoidable. Daily life adjusts to the new pace. Meals are eaten quickly. Leisure shrinks. Family routines bend around work schedules. Children contribute where possible. Education competes with necessity. Despite hardship, momentum continues. Production increases. Innovation accelerates. Electricity begins to replace gas. Communication improves. The nation feels modern in ways previously unimaginable. Immigration reshapes identity. The population becomes more diverse, more layered. Customs blend. New traditions form alongside old ones. The idea of what it means to belong expands unevenly. Resistance to change appears as well. Nativism grows in response to difference. Laws restrict entry selectively. Suspicion accompanies unfamiliar languages and customs. Acceptance varies by region and circumstance. By the early 20th century, industrialization defines the nation's character. Cities dominate. Factories anchor economies. Railroads tie regions together reliably. Immigration fuels growth and tension simultaneously. Evenings in industrial cities sound different from those on farms. Machinery quiets gradually. Streets remain active. Lights glow through windows. Work resumes the next day without pause. The age does not announce itself as transformation. It unfolds through routine repetition. Machines run. Ships arrive. People adapt. The nation moves forward, carried by steel, steam, and labor. Growth feels inevitable. The future appears tied not to land alone, but to industry, movement, and the constant arrival of those willing to begin again. The world beyond the ocean begins to fracture, but at first, the disturbance feels distant. News arrives slowly, carried by headlines and conversation rather than urgency. In 1914, war breaks out in Europe, triggered by alliances, rivalries, and long-held tensions. Across the Atlantic, daily life in the United States continues largely unchanged. Factories operate, trains run on schedule, markets open and close. The conflict feels remote, contained within foreign borders. The nation adopts a posture of neutrality, cautious and deliberate. Distance offers insulation, both geographic and emotional. Trade continues, though patterns shift. American goods move outward in increasing volume. Food, materials, and supplies cross the ocean toward nations at war. Industry benefits quietly. Production increases. Employment grows. Prosperity expands unevenly, but steadily. Public opinion remains divided. Some advocate involvement, citing economic ties and shared values. Others urge restraint, wary of entanglement in distant struggles. The debate unfolds through speeches, editorials, and private conversation. The war drags on. Its scale becomes clearer. Casualties mount. Landscapes are altered permanently. The industrial nature of the conflict reveals a new kind of warfare, shaped by machines, trenches, and attrition rather than movement. In 1917, circumstances shift decisively. Submarine attacks disrupt shipping. Diplomatic messages surface, altering perception. Neutrality no longer feels sufficient. The cost of remaining distant grows harder to justify. The United States enters the war formally in April 1917. The decision is legal and procedural, but its implications are vast. Mobilization begins quickly. Industries adapt. Production shifts toward military needs. The economy reorients without pause. Troops are trained and transported overseas. Many leave home for the first time. The journey is long. Preparation is uneven. Expectations vary widely. The scale of movement feels unprecedented. On the battlefield, American forces arrive late but with momentum. Fresh troops alter dynamics. Their presence reinforces exhausted allies. The contribution is not immediate victory, but renewed capacity. The war demands coordination beyond national borders. Alliances require negotiation. Strategy becomes collective. The United States begins to operate within a global framework rather than alongside it. At home, the war reshapes society. Propaganda circulates. Loyalty is emphasized. Dissent is monitored. Daily life adjusts to scarcity and regulation. Conservation becomes routine. Resources are managed carefully. Women enter industrial roles in greater numbers. Labor patterns shift. Expectations change quietly. The workforce expands, altering social norms incrementally. The war concludes in 1918. Fighting stops. Armistice is declared. The end arrives with relief rather than celebration. Loss overshadows triumph. The scale of destruction resists comprehension. In the aftermath, the United States emerges altered. Its economy is stronger. Its influence is broader. Its voice carries weight in international discussions. The shift is gradual but undeniable. Participation in the war marks a transition. The nation moves from regional power to global presence. Engagement becomes precedent. Isolation feels less attainable. Treaties are negotiated. Conferences convene. Ideals are articulated. The vision of global order is discussed, debated, and partially realized. The outcome is imperfect, but the process itself signals change. At home, adjustment continues. Soldiers return, industries reconvert, the economy recalibrates. Memory settles unevenly. The war's legacy does not resolve neatly. It introduces complexity rather than closure. The nation's role has expanded, bringing opportunity and responsibility. Evenings resume familiar rhythms. Lights glow. Conversations soften. Yet the world feels smaller, more connected, less distant. The United States steps onto the global stage not through conquest alone, but through participation. The movement is measured, shaped by necessity rather than ambition. The era closes quietly. The nation stands altered by experience, positioned within a broader world. Its future now tied more closely to events beyond its shores. The decade begins with confidence. Cities are busy. Markets are active. Production remains high. The idea of progress feels steady, almost automatic. For many, prosperity appears durable, reinforced by routine and expectation. The future seems manageable. shaped by growth rather than uncertainty. In 1929, that sense of stability fractures quietly at first. Stock prices fall. Numbers on paper lose meaning. What begins as a financial correction spreads outward, touching banks, businesses, and households. The collapse does not announce itself with noise. It unfolds through closed offices, unanswered loans, and lines forming where none existed before. Banks fail in succession. Savings disappear overnight. Trust erodes quickly. People withdraw what they can, when they can. The system strains under fear more than mathematics. Credit freezes. Investment halts. Commerce slows to a crawl. Unemployment rises steadily. Factories reduce hours, then close entirely. Workers are dismissed in waves. Skills offer little protection. Experience does not guarantee security. The loss of work reshapes daily life abruptly. Cities absorb the impact unevenly. Some neighborhoods decline rapidly. Others hold briefly, then follow. Breadlines grow longer. Shelters fill. Makeshift communities form on unused land, assembled from scrap and necessity. Poverty becomes visible rather than hidden. Rural areas struggle differently. Crop prices collapse. Farms fail. Drought compounds hardship. The land offers little relief when markets vanish. Migration increases as families search for survival rather than opportunity. The federal government responds cautiously at first. Traditional approaches favor limited involvement. Assistance is local, fragmented, and insufficient. The scale of the crisis overwhelms existing structures. In 1933, leadership changes. Franklin D. Roosevelt assumes the presidency during uncertainty rather than optimism. His tone is calm, deliberate, reassuring. He speaks of action rather than reassurance alone. His presence itself becomes a signal of movement. The New Deal emerges as a series of programs rather than a single plan. It is experimental, adaptive, and expansive. The federal government steps into roles previously avoided. Employment is created through public works. Infrastructure projects reshape landscapes while providing wages. Agencies form to stabilize banking, regulate markets, and support agriculture. Confidence is addressed directly. Banks reopen under supervision. Currency circulation resumes. The system begins to function again, slowly. Government intervention becomes routine rather than exceptional. Assistance flows through formal channels. Support reaches households through employment, subsidies, and social programs. Relief does not eliminate hardship, but it reshapes expectations. The relationship between citizens and government changes quietly. Authority feels closer. Responsibility expands. The idea that government can act as stabilizer gains acceptance through experience rather than theory. Criticism persists. Some view intervention as overreach. Others see it as insufficient. Debate remains active, but the direction is clear. The role of government has shifted permanently. Daily life adjusts gradually. Employment returns unevenly. Wages remain low. Confidence rebuilds slowly. Progress feels incremental rather than dramatic. By the late 1930s, conditions improve but remain fragile. Recovery is partial. Uncertainty lingers. The economy functions, but without previous ease. As the decade closes, external pressures grow. Events abroad begin to reshape priorities. Production increases again, driven by new demand. The economy gains momentum through necessity rather than design. The era does not end with resolution. It ends with adjustment. The Great Depression reshapes understanding of risk, responsibility, and resilience. Evenings settle into quieter routines. Families adapt. Expectations moderate. Stability becomes valued over growth. The Roosevelt era leaves behind structures rather than certainty. Government intervention becomes accepted as tool rather than exception. The economy remains complex, but better understood. The crisis passes not through single solution, but through sustained response. The nation emerges altered, carrying lessons shaped by collapse and recovery, prepared to face a future that will soon demand even greater coordination. The decade opens with uncertainty rather than calm. Across the oceans, conflict expands steadily, reshaping continents through force and exhaustion. In the United States, distance still provides a sense of separation. News arrives daily, heavier than before, yet life continues within familiar routines. Factories operate, streets remain busy. The war feels present, but not personal. That distance collapses abruptly in December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor arrives without warning, carried by sound and fire rather than debate. Ships burn in the harbor. Aircraft fall from the sky. The moment is brief, decisive, and irreversible. Neutrality ends instantly, replaced by mobilization. The nation responds with speed and coordination. Industry shifts without hesitation. Production lines are retooled. Civilian manufacturing gives way to military supply. Ships, aircraft, vehicles, and weapons are produced at scale. The economy reorients fully toward war. Men enlist in large numbers. Training camps fill quickly. Movement becomes constant. Troops travel across the country and beyond it, crossing oceans toward unfamiliar terrain. The scale of deployment is unprecedented. The war divides into theaters defined by geography rather than ideology. In Europe, American forces join established allies against entrenched opposition. Campaigns unfold across fields, cities, and coastlines. Progress is slow and costly. Terrain resists momentum. Each advance requires coordination, supply, and endurance. In the Pacific, the conflict takes a different form. Islands become objectives. Naval power shapes outcomes. Engagements unfold across vast distances where logistics matter as much as combat. Conditions are harsh. Climate adds strain. Movement is deliberate and costly. The war demands total participation. At home, daily life adjusts to scarcity and regulation. Rationing becomes routine. Materials are conserved. Recycling becomes habit. The presence of war enters kitchens, factories, and streets through instruction rather than alarm. Women enter industrial roles in greater numbers, filling positions left vacant by enlistment. Expectations shift quietly. Workplaces adapt. Contribution becomes collective rather than segmented. The federal government coordinates effort across sectors. Planning replaces improvisation. Authority expands to meet demand. The scale of organization reflects necessity rather than ambition. As the war continues, losses accumulate steadily. Casualties arrive as numbers first, then as absence. Families wait for letters. Silence carries meaning. The cost is shared unevenly, but widely. Momentum builds gradually. Allied forces advance across Europe. Supply lines stabilize. Coordination improves. The pressure intensifies without guaranteeing speed. In the Pacific, the path forward remains demanding. Each objective requires sustained effort. Progress is measured in control rather than distance. By 1945, the end approaches without sudden clarity. European fighting concludes first. The conflict there ceases through surrender rather than collapse. Relief follows, tempered by exhaustion. Attention shifts fully to the Pacific. The remaining opposition remains firm. Options are considered carefully. The scale of potential loss weighs heavily. A decision is made that alters the course of history. The atomic bomb is deployed. Its impact is immediate and absolute. Cities are destroyed in moments. The war ends abruptly. The event introduces a new reality. Power becomes measured differently. Destruction reaches a scale previously unimaginable. The implications extend beyond the conflict itself. The war concludes formally. Fighting stops. Movement slows. Troops begin returning home. Industries adjust again. The transition feels uneven, shaped by memory and loss. The United States emerges changed fundamentally. Its economy is dominant. Its military capacity is unmatched. Its influence extends across continents. The nation occupies a position no longer defined by participation alone, but by leadership. The rise to superpower status is not announced. It becomes apparent through presence, capacity, and expectation. Decisions made now carry global consequence. Daily life resumes gradually. Rationing ends. Production shifts. Families reunite. Normalcy returns unevenly. The war leaves behind more than victory. It reshapes identity, responsibility, and possibility. The nation stands at a new scale of influence, carrying both confidence and caution. Evenings settle again into routine. Lights glow, conversations soften. Yet the world feels permanently altered. The conflict closes, not as a chapter completed, but as a transformation realized. The United States moves forward into a new era, defined by power, coordination, and the enduring weight of choices made under extraordinary pressure. The war has ended, but peace does not arrive in a familiar form. Instead of rest, a different kind of tension settles in. Quiet, constant, and global. The United States emerges from World War II with unmatched industrial strength and military capacity, yet the atmosphere is not celebratory. Attention shifts outward toward a new rival whose influence expands across continents without direct confrontation. The Soviet Union stands opposite, equal in reach, if not in method. The rivalry does not rely on open battle. It unfolds through ideology, alliances, and influence. Power is measured in proximity, technology, and perception. The world divides gradually into spheres of alignment, mapped less by borders than by allegiance. This period becomes known as the Cold War, not because it lacks conflict, but because confrontation avoids direct collision between the two powers. The tension is sustained, persistent, and unresolved. It moves through speeches, treaties, espionage, and arms development. Fear becomes a constant companion, managed through routine rather than panic. At home, preparation becomes part of daily life. Civil defense drills are practiced. Shelters are discussed. The possibility of sudden destruction is acknowledged quietly, often without discussion. The threat remains abstract, yet present. Conflict breaks out indirectly. In Korea, the division of territory leads to war. American forces engage under international authority. The fighting is intense, but contained geographically. The result is stalemate rather than resolution. Borders harden. The conflict ends without clarity, reinforcing the pattern of limited engagement. Years later, involvement deepens in Southeast Asia. Vietnam becomes another arena shaped by ideology and influence. The war unfolds slowly, escalating over time. The terrain resists control. The conflict becomes prolonged and complex, difficult to define through traditional measures of success. At home, the Vietnam War alters perception. Public support erodes gradually. Media coverage brings distant conflict into living rooms. protest movements grow. Trust between government and citizens weakens. The war becomes not only a foreign engagement, but a domestic issue. The Cold War influences technology and science. Competition accelerates innovation. Space becomes a new frontier for rivalry. Satellites orbit overhead. Exploration reflects ambition as much as curiosity. Achievements are measured symbolically as well as practically. The economy adapts to sustained military readiness. Defense spending remains high. Research expands. Industry aligns with long-term preparedness. Stability is maintained through continuous engagement rather than resolution. While global tension persists, domestic life undergoes profound change. Beneath the surface of geopolitical rivalry, social movements reshape the nation's internal structure. The civil rights movement gains momentum during this era. Inequality that has persisted for generations becomes increasingly visible and contested. African Americans challenge segregation through organized action, legal challenge, and sustained resistance. Protests unfold through marches, boycotts, and acts of civil disobedience. The approach is deliberate, often peaceful, and persistent. Resistance is met with force in many cases. Images of confrontation circulate widely, altering public awareness. Legislation follows pressure. Laws are passed to dismantle formal segregation. Voting rights are expanded. Legal barriers are removed. The changes arrive through policy, but their application varies. The movement reshapes public life. Institutions adjust. Expectations evolve. Progress is uneven and incomplete, but structural shifts take place. The nation's self-image is challenged and revised through experience. Other movements emerge alongside it. Women advocate for expanded rights and opportunity. Cultural norms are questioned. Personal freedom becomes subject of public discussion. Change accelerates through conversation as much as law. The Cold War context influences these developments. International rivalry highlights contradictions between ideals and practice. Pressure mounts to align domestic reality with stated principles. As decades pass, the rivalry with the Soviet Union persists, then weakens. Economic strain and political change alter the balance. Dialogue replaces hostility gradually. The tension that defined daily life softens without formal conclusion. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. The Cold War ends not through victory in battle, but through transformation. The long rivalry concludes quietly, reshaping the global order. The United States remains, altered by decades of sustained tension. Its institutions have expanded. Its society has changed. Its role in the world feels established rather than assumed. Daily life continues, shaped by habits formed during uncertainty. The era leaves behind memory rather than resolution. The nation carries forward lessons learned through rivalry and reform, shaped by endurance rather than triumph. The Cold War fades into history, leaving its imprint on global relationships and domestic life alike. The tension recedes, but the changes it produced remain, woven into the structure of modern society through experience, adaptation, and time. The tension that once defined daily awareness begins to lift. Without formal announcement, the long rivalry that shaped global alignment recedes into memory. The world does not become quiet, but it becomes different. For the first time in decades, there is no opposing superpower to balance against. The United States finds itself alone at the center of global influence. This position does not arrive through celebration. It settles in gradually, through absence rather than conquest. Alliances remain. Institutions persist. Yet the scale of responsibility expands. Decisions made domestically carry broader consequence. Presence becomes expectation. Foreign policy adjusts to new conditions. Engagement replaces containment. Intervention becomes selective. The role of leadership is assumed rather than debated. Influence operates through economics, diplomacy, and culture as much as force. Globalization accelerates during this period. Markets integrate across borders. Trade expands. Goods move quickly and cheaply. Supply chains stretch across continents. Production becomes international rather than local. American corporations extend their reach. Brands become global. Manufacturing shifts outward. Services expand. The economy adapts to interconnectedness, gaining efficiency while exposing vulnerability. Technology reshapes everyday life. Computers move from specialized tools to household items. Communication accelerates. Information becomes immediate. The internet begins to link individuals and markets without regard for distance. Work patterns shift. Knowledge-based industries grow. Automation increases. Traditional labor models adjust slowly. Opportunity expands unevenly. Financial markets respond to speed. Capital flows quickly. Investment crosses borders. Growth appears sustained. Confidence builds. At home, prosperity becomes more visible. Employment remains strong. Consumption increases. Lifestyle adjusts to convenience and choice. Yet beneath growth, disparities remain. Access to technology varies. Benefits of globalization concentrate unevenly. Stability depends on systems that remain largely untested under stress. Cultural influence spreads alongside economic reach. Media travels widely. Entertainment becomes export. Language and imagery circulate globally. Identity extends beyond borders. The absence of a singular external threat shifts focus inward. Political discourse adjusts. Priorities realign. The sense of urgency fades, replaced by management rather than mobilization. By the end of the decade, the economy feels strong. Innovation drives optimism. The future appears manageable, shaped by networks rather than rivalry. Daily life reflects acceleration. Communication becomes constant. Time compresses. Expectations adjust to immediacy. The era closes without clear marker. It settles into place through routine growth rather than defining event. The United States remains central, connected to a global system it helps sustain. Evenings feel lighter, quieter. The weight of constant threat recedes. The world appears open, interconnected, and stable. The post-Cold War period leaves behind confidence tempered by complexity. Power rests not only in strength, but in integration. The nation moves forward, shaped by connection, technology, and the evolving balance of global interdependence. The morning begins without warning. Skies are clear. Routine holds. Offices open. Flights depart. Conversations follow familiar paths. Nothing suggests interruption. Then, in moments that move faster than understanding, the ordinary structure of the day collapses. On September 11th, 2001, coordinated attacks strike symbols of economic and military presence. The impact is immediate and overwhelming. Images repeat across screens, difficult to absorb, harder to accept. Confusion spreads before comprehension can form. The sense of distance that once separated events abroad from daily life disappears instantly. The nation pauses. Movement slows. Airspace closes. Streets empty. Attention fixes on screens and radios. The feeling is not panic alone, but disbelief. The scale feels unfamiliar, the vulnerability exposed. In the days that follow, response becomes the focus. Security intensifies. Procedures change. Language shifts toward vigilance and prevention. The idea of safety is redefined through layers of oversight and control. Military action begins overseas. Wars in the Middle East follow, framed as necessity and defense. Forces deploy to unfamiliar terrain. Engagement becomes prolonged rather than decisive. Objectives shift over time, shaped by evolving conditions rather than clear endpoints. The conflicts extend for years. Resources are committed steadily. Losses accumulate quietly. The presence of war becomes background rather than headline, integrated into routine awareness. At home, institutions adjust. Surveillance expands. Travel changes. Public spaces are redesigned for security. The balance between protection and privacy becomes subject of constant negotiation. Technology accelerates these changes. Digital tools shape communication, information, and organization. The internet becomes central to daily life. Social interaction moves online. News circulates continuously, without pause. The digital age reshapes attention. Information arrives instantly, filtered unevenly. Voices multiply. Authority fragments. Consensus becomes harder to maintain. Debate intensifies through exposure rather than deliberation. Economic systems adapt to speed and connectivity. Work shifts towards screens and networks. Boundaries between personal and professional life blur. Productivity increases alongside exhaustion. Social media alters public discourse. Identity becomes performative. Opinion spreads rapidly. Conflict amplifies through repetition. The pace of reaction outpaces reflection. Political polarization deepens gradually. Positions harden. Compromise becomes rare. Trust erodes. Institutions strain under scrutiny. Dialogue fragments into parallel narratives. The experience of unity that followed the attacks fades with time. Shared purpose gives way to disagreement. Memory remains, but interpretation diverges. Global engagement continues. Alliances shift. Strategy evolves. The nation remains present internationally, but the nature of involvement grows complex. Cultural life adapts to constant change. Art, media, and expression respond to immediacy and fragmentation. Attention becomes currency. Silence becomes rare. Despite intensity, daily life persists. Work continues. Families gather. Routine absorbs disruption. Change becomes background rather than event. The modern era settles into contradiction. Connectivity increases alongside division. Information expands alongside uncertainty. Security intensifies alongside anxiety. Evenings arrive with screens still glowing. Notifications replace closure. The sense of finality remains elusive. The period does not resolve neatly. It unfolds through adaptation rather than conclusion. The nation moves forward within a landscape shaped by memory, technology, and sustained tension. September 11th marks a shift not only in policy, but in perception. The world feels closer, more immediate, and less predictable. Modern America emerges defined by vigilance, connectivity, and debate, navigating a present shaped by events that continue to echo quietly through everyday life.